Good morning, everyone. I love talking about books. I'm one of those people that's not allowed in a bookstore without adult supervision. And I really love talking about books that I love. I happened upon Conversations with God, Book 4, a couple of months ago. And I think I've only read it 4 times. And I find it just really engaging, invigorating, and it makes me want to do what God suggests through Neale Walsch. Neale Donald Walsch has sold something like 10 million copies of his books, the Conversation with God series, written in 37 different languages. And he hasn't written any books in 10 years. And then in August of 16, in the middle of the night, he was awakened with this quite familiar urge to sit down at his computer and start writing. And immediately, he was faced with 2 questions. And the first question was, is the human race being offered assistance from highly evolved beings from another dimension? And the second question is, are the people of the world being called to join together and co-create a better world? And the answer to both of those questions was a resounding yes. So this already is outside the realm of what is considered ordinary. Highly evolved beings from another dimension, spaceships, what? Really? Well, as it turns out, there's a lot of things that we don't know. We don't know anything about. And what little we know about the universe is that it's a very big place. It's now estimated by astrophysicists that there are 1 trillion galaxies in the universe. 1 trillion. That's a very large number. And the average number of stars per galaxy is a mere 200 billion, 200 billion stars per galaxy. So when you talk about stars, that's a very large number. 1 trillion times 200 billion. So out of all of those places, might there be a highly evolved society? Well, God says through Neale Walsch, yes, indeed, there are. And they are assisting humanity. Not so that they have become visible, because they realize that if we saw spaceships landing, we might think of War of the Worlds or all of the other things, and we'd scramble the Air Force and seek to defend ourselves. So what is actually going on is that they are energetically sending ideas to us, and that we might choose, if we would care to create a better world, to create a better us. Because truly there's a list of 16 ways in which highly evolved beings differ from the human race. And one of the most important one is violence. Highly evolved beings never participate in violence. Not physical violence, not emotional violence, not verbal violence. They don't call violence self-defense. They certainly don't call violence entertainment, and they absolutely do not call violence sport. So we are invited to think along the lines of the ways in which highly evolved beings, highly evolved societies live and function. One of the things that comes to mind is to take a look around the world and to see what's going on in our world. Some 1.5 billion of the 7 billion people on Earth have no access to electricity. 1.6 billion of the 7 billion of us have no access to clean water. 2.5 billion of the 7 billion of us on the planet have no access to toilets. 19,000 children die every single day from preventable health issues. And each hour of each day on this planet, 650 children starve to death. Is there not enough food? No, there's plenty of food. There is absolutely enough food. What there isn't is the will to see that sharing is the way the world works, rather than I've got mine and you can find out a way to get yours. So that's not necessarily an indictment, because indeed, our society, our civilization, such as it is very young. We are a very young species. And you can put that in a context by looking at the history of the Earth on a 1-year time frame. Think of the beginnings of the formation of the Earth as midnight, New Year's Eve on day 1. And today is midnight at the end of that year. So that means that each day in the calendar year represents 12 million years, because the Earth is somewhere north of 4.5 billion years old. Seem to have a froggy in my throat. Oh, well. So that means that the first beginnings of life showed up in February, simple one-celled bacteria. And later on in the year, higher versions of animal life showed up. Fishes began to show up around November 20th. The dinosaurs showed up on December the 10th and disappeared on Christmas Day. And the first creatures recognizable as human showed up on December 15th. And the species known as Homo sapiens, us, showed up in the afternoon of December 15th. And all of recorded history takes place in the last minute of the last hour. So we've only existed for a minute. So it's not surprising that we have not progressed as far as it might seem like we would be capable of progressing. Now, is that an indictment of us? No, it's not an indictment at all. Is it an indictment of a 3-year-old to say that a 3-year-old doesn't understand all of the ways that we adults understand? No, of course not. It's just simply what is. So in this wide space of the universe with 1 trillion galaxies and more stars and planets than we can even imagine, is it possible that we're being guided? Is it possible that we have been seen as a place for awakening? The other important takeaway from this book is really critical, and that is we already are awake. We just don't believe it. We just don't act like it. We've talked ourselves into behaving the way the egoic, fear-based mind would have us behave. But the fact is that we are awake. But since we don't believe it, essentially we're not awake. So the subtitle of this wonderful book is Awaken the Species. We are called to participate, self-select, if you will, the opportunity to create and adopt some of these lifestyles of highly evolved societies and put them into practice so that we might create a better world, so that we share everything with everyone all the time. Now, as a practical matter, we're talking about a transition period. I'm not suggesting that we give away all of our assets and expect to live with a begging bowl as some of the mendicants do in India. That's not what I'm suggesting. Because, indeed, we can pick and choose which of these things we can begin the practice of doing now. And we will make a difference. Because you see, what we do when we practice these kinds of lifestyle changes is that we change the energy in the room. We change the energy in the vicinity. We change the energy in the state, in the nation, and ultimately the energy in the world is changed by the changes that we make in ourselves. We're not called to go out and convince everybody else that we're right and they've got it wrong. That's not what's going on here at all. We're invited to change ourselves. And by so doing, changing ourselves, we literally energize the whole world. The whole world is connected. And how do we give up violence? The way to give up violence is to know absolutely that there is no separation. None. We are not separate. We are not different from each other. In fact, there is only one thing in the universe, and that is all that is. All that is another name for God. All that is. We ourselves, each one of us individuated beings, is a cell in communication with all the rest of the cells of the universe called all that is. And each cell of your body has intelligence and communicates with the other cells of your body. And they work together. Sometimes they go awry, But mostly they're trying to work together. And you can know that this is true because you cut your finger, and instantly the cells of your body are sending antibodies and blood supply and healing methodologies to your finger. And they do that because they know what they're doing. They do that because they are behaving consistently with maintaining themselves as a viable entity. And we, as cells of the universe, have taken on amnesia. We have forgotten who we really are. We have forgotten that we are individuated expressions of divinity. Most of us think that our highest desire is to survive. But that's not true. That is simply not true. What we are experiencing when we experience our highest desire is the desire to express our essence, the desire to express the divinity that we are. That is our highest desire. We are invited, again, I say, we have been invited by God, and you can believe that there's a God or not, but we have been invited to self-select. For each of us to say, well, I can do that. I can try letting go of violence. I can try always telling the truth. Always, in all ways, tell the truth. We might even try saying one thing and then doing one thing. Much of humanity says one thing and then does another. We might try seeing what is so and then saying, let's do what works, instead of saying, let's do what we've always done. Let's do what my mother said to do, or whatever story we've been fed. Well, we just don't do it that way. I think you've probably heard that expression. That's just not the way it's done around here. Well, we have an amazing opportunity. Speaking of God, one of the most interesting places that you can find now a discussion of the absolute requirement that God be recognized as the creator is among the community of astrophysicists who have been card-carrying atheists for as long as you can remember. But they now see from studying astronomy and astrophysics that it's simply statistically impossible for this planet to be life-supporting by accident. It simply cannot happen. 52 years ago, in 1966, the then well-known astronomer Carl Sagan wrote, it's necessary for a planet to sustain life to have two things. One, the right kind of star, and two, the right kind of distance from that star. And now it's clear, 52 years later, from an advance in scientific understanding, that it's not just two things that have to be in place for life to be sustained on a planet. There's 200 things that have to be in place and have to be precise down to the tiniest little decimal point. Because if it's not there, everything falls apart. Astrophysicists now say that within the first 1/1,000,000th of a second after the Big Bang, the relationship between the four essential forces, gravity, the electromagnetic force, and the strong and weak nuclear forces, were determined. And they cannot be at variance with each other, or the whole thing falls apart. There would be no stars if those ratios had been different than what they were within 1/1,000,000th of a second of the Big Bang occurring. The guy who coined the phrase Big Bang now says, my atheism is in great jeopardy. I can no longer say that this is not possible. In fact, I say statistically, it's impossible that some intelligence, some design feature is not at work, because it's just simply not possible that this big explosion happened and all of these ratios came to be in just the right way. So I suggest that indeed, whatever God is, I'm sure God's not a white guy with a long beard sitting on a throne somewhere. But I'm sure that whatever that force is, and that's another definition of God that I really like, the force. May the force be with you. There's a lot of truth in that. There's an absolute high level of truth in that concept. But whatever that is, it has the intelligence to communicate with us and to suggest to Neale Walsch, who was open and receptive to that communication, listen, there are things you don't know about the universe. There are things that you don't understand, and there are highly evolved beings sending ideas to you about suggestions that you might choose to adopt. Not to save the world, but to create and highly evolve your own being, your own beingness. We're not called to go out and save the world. We're called to practice being an evolved being ourselves. That's all we're asked to do. I'm not going to read the whole list of 16 ways in which they're different, but I suggest that if you're interested in this topic, get a hold of the book. Probably going to do a series of classes in the fall on this book. And I guarantee you, it'll put stretch marks on your brain. Once your brain expands to go around an idea, a new idea, you'll never be able to go back. You will not be able to get rid of those stretch marks. Doomed. So, the invitation to each of you is to self-select and to begin the process of adopting the ways in which highly evolved, notice the difference between evolved and advanced, highly evolved societies live, and see if it doesn't make a difference both in your world and in the world around us. So now it's open mic time.